Hello and welcome. Well, modern parenting is tough, especially when it comes to navigating a balance between providing kids with access to technology and maintaining a healthy amount of screen time. Now, as a parent, how do you know the difference between if your kids are tech savvy enough that they won't be left behind, to understanding what is the right amount of exposure to technology and when have they simply just had enough screen time? Now, lucky for us today, our special guest will share some expert tips and advice with an easy approach that you can apply at home to help navigate this. So, today we speak with Christopher Hogbin, Global Education Strategy of 3P Learning, who are the name behind online learning programs such as Mathletics, Readiwriter and Reading Eggs. Now, a little bit about our guest. Chris has a science maths degree and a master of teaching. On a regular basis, he presents webinars, podcasts on pedagogy, engagement, navigating COVID-19, remote teaching and learning. And for the last 10 years, Chris has also taught high school mathematics in both Australia and in the UK, in both public and private sectors, in the classroom and also head of department. So thank you for joining us today, Chris. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's great to be here. And I might add, I am also the father of a 10-year-old and an almost 7-year-old. I think that's probably the toughest job that I do.
I love it, the almost 7-year-old. And Chris, it's been said also that you're really passionate about making learning real and relevant for students. And, in this day and age, kids and technology pretty much go hand in hand these days. And it's really hard to believe that so many children will go throughout life not knowing what life was actually and the world was like before we had access to technology. So, many parents do ask the question, has technology brought conveniences or complexities to our lives? So, as a dad, as you just mentioned, and a high school maths teacher, do you think children are better or worse off with technology in their life?
Yes. Can I answer yes? I think it's a multifaceted question. It's a very difficult one. I think there is the temptation to sometimes just throw out technology to land on sort of that end of the scale and say, look, there are so many dangers, there are so many worries. There's new articles coming out all the time, sort of alerting us to these, that the temptation is to throw things out. But I think that would be remiss, because technology also does give us so many great things, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. So I think we have to take a really common sense approach. I think we have to acknowledge, I think it's really helpful to acknowledge that it's a really tough job. Like, as parents, we want to protect our kids. We want to do the best for our kids, especially because they're vulnerable in so many ways. So it's really helpful to acknowledge it's a tough gig. And there are people that land on all parts of the scale. I speak to parents every week who say, you know what, I'm going to sort of leave them to their own devices, forgive the pun, and let them run their own world. They're tech natives, they're digitally savvy. I'm going to let them go. And then I've got equally the same parents on the other end, who are also trying to do the right thing by their kids. And they say, you know what, I'm going to protect them from the dangers of technology. I'm going to protect them from the dangers of social media, and we're going to say no devices in the home or ever. And both ends of those scale have real dangers in there as well. So I think it's such a tough job being a parent with all this conflicting advice, and sometimes you just want to bury your head in the sand and say it's all too hard.
Well, I mean, flowing from that then, I mean, how, with all your experience as well, and in what you've done with teaching and also in your professional role with 3P Learning, how do you see children continue to benefit from technology? And equally on the flip side, how do you see that their lives have been hindered because of it? Two-part question.
Yeah, no, that's. I might need to come back for the second part after I talk. Again, this is something that I get to wrestle with, and there's no silver bullet to any of these answers. But some of the real benefits of technology that I see day to day is just the sheer engagement. So technology, it's often interactive, it's colorful. You can play with it much more than you can often really simple concepts on paper can come to life and be really dynamic on a screen. So it engages kids in their learning. It has this amazing ability to connect students, and sometimes that can come back and be a detriment as well. But it connects kids either one-to-one. It might connect them to their teacher. It might give access to information. Just in a couple of weeks, we've got a World Maths Day, which is going to connect millions of kids sort of doing sort of maths together. So it just give that real sense of global connection as well. Socially, it can really help, especially my eldest child is a real introvert. And so having conversations with people is quite tricky for him. But put him behind a screen and he'll type away. And so you can actually get a lot more sort of emotions and what he's thinking by typing to him. So it can give kids access. I think the other really obvious place we've seen screen time come to the fore, or technology come to the fore, is just over the past year and a half, where there's sort of remote teaching around the globe. We couldn't have done it without technology. We've seen places sort of without that access to technology really struggle to keep up, which is a real shame. But it does highlight how much technology can still facilitate that learning. And I've loved watching teachers grow and come to know this technology, which for a lot of people is really feared, and really sort of leverage it. And now remote teaching, it's just like that. I remember my kids' school a couple of weeks ago, they had some flooding, and the transition to remote learning was seamless. It was fantastic. And and that's come because we've all sort of being forced to get to know this new world of remote learning. So I've touched on a few benefits. I knew I'd have to come back to the second part of the question.
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, if we know how it has and is hindering their lives, we can work with that. So like anything, I mean, I think spelling definitely is one thing, even as us adults, that because we have spell check in almost every device and every app that we use, as well. So, I mean, I personally think that spelling is one of the things that have hindered lives, and also just getting the balance potentially is just the amount of time on screens. I know myself, working in front of a computer all day, that my eyesight isn't always great. That's an aging thing as well, of course, but this is,
we don't talk about that.
Yeah, but I mean, I'd love to know. So yeah, throw it back to you about how you see that technology is potentially hindering their lives, with the view of what, like I said, so we understand it, so we can sort of work with it, and to be able to have it in the end, on the flip side, benefit them.
Yeah, of course. I think there are lots of dangers, some obvious, some hidden. There is a lot of research and a lot more qualified people to talk about the science behind it. We've talked about sort of the blue light, lots of those, lots of dangers. I suppose the more physiological ones, like if kids are sort of sedentary, spending time on screens, they're not active, and it's there's all this sort of sometimes sensationalized media going around about their spines are changing shape and different things. And so they're definitely things we have to consider. And I think as parents, they're probably more obvious, and we sort of think, oh, let's get the kids outside, let's get them socializing. I think there are some more inherent dangers with screens and the tech and the apps that our kids use as well. I always like to ask that question: what's the intention behind the app? There's always a value exchange going on when a kid is using technology, and I like to think, well, what's the value exchange here? Is this tech company actually looking out for the best interest of this kid? Are they trying to help them to learn or to grow? Or are they sort of an advertising-based business model, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the kid's attention for as long as they can, because the kid is actually the product, and they're throwing ads at them, and they're throwing more and more time, and they spend millions of dollars just trying to keep them on there for as long as they possibly can. And so what happens is rather than kids making deliberate choices on what they're using, it's much more impulse driven, and adults are exactly the same. Like, how many times do you sort of spend half an hour and just go, oh, I didn't choose to spend that half an hour, it disappeared on impulses, and impulses sort of turn into bad habits. And unfortunately, a lot of these companies make their money on sort of exploiting and leveraging our impulses, leveraging sort of that dopamine hit that we love. And unfortunately, social media does a lot of that as well. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that in this sort of ever connected world of social media, kids are as disconnected as they've ever been, and social and emotional well-being is right up there at things that sort of we're all considering in how to address in kids. And so, yeah, it's really tough because there are these inherent dangers, but you can't just say, well, let's just throw it out then, because there are other dangers. I've had teenage parents come to me, and I'm not there yet, and so I'm actually a little bit worried about how to address some of these needs. But they say to me, look, we banned social media because we watched this documentary on the dangers of it, but now my child is really marginalized at school because they haven't sort of had any contact, and all their friendship group have spent the whole weekend interacting on whatever platform, and they come to Monday, and so they're now a social outcast because we've said no to social media. So it's a really tough one to navigate as parents, because there are so many inherent dangers.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's we could sort of really flesh that out. There's so much more to talk about, and I really want to pick your brains on the information that you published in, or that you wrote in the article. So, for everyone watching and listening, we published an article titled "Teaching Parents to Budget Screen Time Can Help them with the minefield of kids and technology." Now, for someone who hasn't read the article yet, can you please tell us what's the article about, and of course, what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's probably, why do we write that article? It's because we have so many people asking this question. We have so many people searching up what is the ideal amount of screen time. I think there was also a recent article brought out by the University of New South Wales on the ideal amount of screen time. And it's tricky because every household is different. Every situation is different. We all use screens for different things. I think many of us have sort of employed the TV or the iPad as the babysitter. Like it's a very easy thing to do. So as parents, we want to do the right thing. We want to look after our kids, and it's just such a minefield out there. So we basically wrote this just as a way to help parents come up with a common sense and deliberate approach. And I think that's really what we want, is to say, this is really tough, but if we're deliberate about it, and we take a common sense approach, and we keep revisiting it, there's no pressure to get this right the first time. And so what we talk about is a budget. We can talk about that in a minute, but you never get budget right the first time. You have a look and say, how did I go? Where do I need to sort of make those changes? What's the impact? But I think it's really coming back to just trying to act on deliberate decisions, on decisions that are driven by our values rather than our impulses. And it's just a really helpful habit I've learned myself, to say, would I have spent that half an hour if I had that time again? Did I choose to spend it that way, or was it sort of impulse driven? Just like when I go to Bunnings and come out with 40 things that I didn't need, it's sort of impulse buying. And I just sit there and go, you know what, I need to actually make my decisions on deliberate decisions. And if I do that proactively, it's far more helpful than just relying on my impulses, because you can't trust them. And the more you do that, the more they sort of turn into bad habits. So yeah, we also thought it was really helpful to clarify, it's not just screen time is good or screen time is bad. There are different types of screen time. So it's really helpful as parents to actually be able to categorize them, and they're not mutually exclusive, that there is overlap. As I've learned, and my son has leveraged, as he often tells me these games he's playing, educational. Look, Dad, there's maths here, there's maths there. And I said, okay, I wish you were so sort of creative in some of your English writing, but I think you've got your educational, you've got gaming, which they sometimes milk as educational. You've got sort of viewing or just watching for, I suppose, for recreational purposes. You've got social media. It's helpful to actually break down and say, well, what is the screen time that they're watching right now? And then it's much easier to say, well, what's the intention behind that? What's the kid getting out of it? It makes it easier to monitor and to look after them as well. I think, for example, 45 minutes of doing their homework is very different to 45 minutes on social media. And it's unhelpful to say 45 minutes on screen time. It's helpful to actually break it up, and even break it up when you're thinking through setting some goals or budgets and things. So that's really where we wanted to just help give parents a bit of a common sense guide, because there is so much confusion out there. It's such a minefield. You take one approach, you get 100 people making you feel bad because you're taking that approach. And so you feel like you just can't win sometimes. And that, like I said before, the temptation is to bury your head in the sand. And what we're saying is, don't bury your head in the sand, because that's the worst possible thing you can do. Just be deliberate, get involved. And you know what I've really learned is that screen time doesn't have to be this sort of they're over there on their screens and I'm over here watching from afar. I can get involved in their screen time. I can go into their world, and that actually gives me a chance to build relationship, to find out where they're sort of getting their identity from. And that also helps me find out where they're going to be vulnerable down the track with things like social media, where I need to invest as a parent in other places as well. So
because you're seeing them on their level, aren't you? You're inviting yourself into their world. We've got one of our writers, Gamer Dad, and he says the same thing, is the fact that he loves the fact that he can sit, and you referenced gaming earlier, but that he uses that as an opportunity to be able to get on the same level as his kids. And he said, otherwise, if he didn't do that, he wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to hear and understand how his son talks to their friends. And you're inviting yourself into their level. I think that's really powerful and very, very I think it's a great opportunity to be able to build the strength of the relationship with your children, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I had a bit of a chuckle while you were talking about that. I thought, you know what, I'm gonna be a good dad, and I'm gonna invest on their level. And the kids got this game on the Switch for Christmas, and I thought I'll come and play with them. And so I had a few games with them. I thought, this is pretty good. And all of a sudden they'd wake up the next day and they'd be like, Dad, we're a few more levels ahead of where we were last night. And so I stayed up and had a little bit of it's not addicted. I just had a couple of little goes, but so we sort of yeah, that's right. And I won't actually name the game we play, but we play it together, and now we sort of have these little in jokes, and there's this sort of special language. And even my son the other day had a birthday cake, and it was built around this game. So it's been a great place for us to connect. And rather than me trying to force him into sport or fishing or whatever, where it's sort of sometimes hard work, I can come into their levels, and it's just a great way.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is it's all about the intention. What's the intention behind the screen time, and what's screen, and what's on the screen, and what's the benefit at the other end. But I mean, ultimately, what challenges overall do you see parents face when it comes to screen time with their kids generally?
Yeah, I think it's just knowing what they're doing sometimes, especially as they sort of become teenagers. They become a little bit more reclusive, and so knowing what they're actually doing. So even if you know all these sort of different categories and these domains, knowing where they're actually spending their time, it's a bit harder once they're teenagers. It's also, even if you know the right thing, how do you enforce these boundaries? Do you say that's it, you're only allowed to spend time on these ones, or do you take them away? Do you what's the best way to sort of enforce these boundaries? There's so much conflicting advice out there. It's just such a challenge to know the right thing to do as a parent. And I suppose that's why we came up with these sort of this screen time budget as a bit of an idea.
And you've referenced some of the, I guess, educational elements of games and those types of things as well. But I'd love to know, just wanted to touch on that, which you mentioned earlier. Why do you think it's important for parents to see, I guess, and understand that video games, as an example, I'm going to say Minecraft, may and it necessarily has, I guess, educational elements for kids, and how do you associate video games, I guess, with the dangers of excess screen time as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really good wrestle to have. And like I said, there's no silver bullet. But let's take Minecraft, for example. There's an amazing amount of sort of spatial reasoning that goes in there, creating these worlds. Like, it's very similar to to architecture in lots of ways, to a lot of the activities that maths textbooks will make them do. But the kids are engaged, they're absolutely loving it. And I suppose one of my other passion areas is is maths teaching. And I dream of this type of engagement and authentic learning in the classroom. So I will often engage these types of things in the classroom, because maths isn't this sort of far away abstract subject that we sometimes come to think of it as. Maths is real world, it's life, and we don't necessarily have to give them a textbook. They can do lots of these applications in games, in projects, and it's far more authentic and real to them, and that's what drives the engagement. There's actually a purpose behind it. They're loving it. They're driving their own learning, not me sort of trying to coerce them with all different means. So there are definitely some huge benefits. Does that mean I say to him, all right, go and have 5 hours of Minecraft? Absolutely not. So
it's all about balance, isn't it? Yes,
exactly. So it's all about balance, and he goes to school, so he obviously has to sort of stay on track with what he's learning in class as well. But there are sometimes subtle benefits we don't know about. There is a lot of maths that goes into sort of creating video games, and so sometimes it's about making kids aware of these things that you actually love. There is a connection to this thing that you might not necessarily love, and so a lot of these sort of gamers finish school and go on to create games, and they say, wow, maths is actually really cool. I wish it wasn't so boring back at school. So I think it's about leveraging that a little bit as well, and connecting their worlds a little bit, rather than saying, here's this sort of dry abstract topic, here's this good fun. Let's merge them a little bit.
And just sort of flowing on from that about balance as well. I understand there was a recent UNSW study provided some answers to the ideal amount of screen time. In the article, you mentioned that I think the ideal amount of screen time is 1 to 2 hours for 11 to 17-year-old students. Is there anything else you can maybe just really, really quickly just tell us about that study that is relevant and that could help parents at all?
Yeah, I think that study was really helpful, but at the same time, as they acknowledged, it changes as students are different age groups.
Of course.
You have different personalities. Like, I know one of my children is sort of really vulnerable to sort of becoming addicted to these things and would spend all day on it. The other one, you'll put on a device and 20 minutes later is outside kicking a footy anyway. So you've got to take that into account. But it also doesn't necessarily take into account different types of screen time as well. I think the main point behind that article is don't throw it out. It can have some real benefits. So it's good to acknowledge those. And it's good to have that balance. And so from that, we just tried to help parents out with giving them a little bit of scaffolding. And that's where this screen time budget idea came from.
So what is the ideal amount of screen time? And is there, I guess, a simple and effective approach that parents can maybe apply?
I'm reticent to say what the ideal amount of screen time is. The ideal amount of screen time for my kids probably changes. But what we like to do is we like to have a really deliberate approach. And so using something like the screen time budget, what we'll do is we'll allocate them different amounts of time per week. And what we'll do is we'll be engaged and involved in that ourselves. And I think they need to see us owning our own behavior and modeling that behavior as well, because to be honest, there are times when my kids have said, Dad, do you mind putting your phone away while we're at the dinner table? And I think, what? That's a really fair point. So we need to model this behavior. There's no point in us saying, you guys need to get it right and put it down, except we're going to sort of spend our time. And my job is remote and my team's global. So it's really hard for me to switch off. And so I've had to learn to, between 5 and 7:30 is a device-free time for me. And so we sort of allocate that time to them. And then each week we say, look, how do we go? And there's some great technology out there which will show you where you've actually spent your time. And it's actually quite convicting at times, because you look at that chart and you think, are you serious? I spent that much time doing that. Like, the time disappears because it's just so impulsive. And so we come together and we say, well, how did it go? Do we need to adjust that? Do we need to put some measures in place? Do we need to put some concrete things in place to help us all? And it's really just trying to be proactive and deliberate and let our values make the decisions rather than our impulses make the decisions. Because
anyone watching and listening, can you maybe just describe just very briefly, what is a screen time budget and how can it help families?
Yeah, for sure. So it's very similar to I suppose a monetary budget, for the same reasons as well. Like, we know if you're not deliberate with your money, It goes to all these places you don't necessarily want it to, and then you run out of it when you need it. And time is of more value than money. So we should be really deliberate, but it's much more slippery. It's not this sort of concrete thing with numbers. We can see it disappears, and at the end of the week you think, my goodness, I spent 3 hours on social media, for example, and you think, I'd love to get that time back and spend it doing something a bit more deliberate. You don't hear many people say at the end of their lives, I wish I spent more time on social media.
Yeah.
You don't hear many people say, I wish I spent more time at work. But it's basically breaking it up and saying, look, here's the different categories. So the example we gave in the article was educational, sort of school-based, educational, extra, in the things that the kids are wanting to do extra, gaming, recreational viewing or watching, social media. And so just breaking it up and saying, this is the amount of time that we're allocating. It's really helpful to see it in hours as well, because you think, wow, I'm giving that many hours to this. It's helpful to have something concrete on paper, and then at the end of the week, you get your Screentime app. There's 100 of them out there, and it shows you the breakdown. And so you can say, how did I go at this? Where do I need to make those changes? And you can have a little bit of fun. It's a great way of connecting as the family. And it's like, Dad, look what you did there. Like you need to put some things in place. And Dad, you keep blowing out on Facebook.
Holding you accountable.
Yeah. And they're very good at holding me accountable. I wish they'd sort of hold themselves as accountable, but it's modeling that behavior as well. And it doesn't have to be this sort of rigid, legalistic approach. It's becoming aware of it. It's just trying to be proactive and deliberate, a time for connection, and having an iterative approach. Like there's no point in saying, look, it was too hard, let's just throw it out, let's go back to doing whatever. It's about saying, you know what, this didn't quite work this week. Let's put some things in place and let's try again for next week, and just keep iterating on that, being deliberate and being aware. And it's just really helping them to become responsible users of technology as they grow older.
But you're teaching them how to do that by doing this.
Exactly. And that's one danger I help to talk to parents that are sort of on that end where they're throwing technology out, is just saying this isn't going away. And you know what, even a lot of their jobs are going to rely on these things. We need to help them to become responsible users whilst protect them, because they're so vulnerable, especially sort of that dopamine and the social media stuff. So it's such a balancing act, but being deliberate and involved means you're not going to get that rude shock where you've sort of left them for a few years and a lot of damage is done. You can actually be in their world and see what's happening.
Yeah, and teaching the difference between what I call positive and negative screen time, so they actually understand that.
And even helping them to ask that question, what's the intention of what I'm doing, and knowing that I'm the product here and I'm just sort of scrolling through ads and little sort of impulsive things, and just helping them to make decisions on sort of deliberate value choices rather than impulsive swiping.
So tell me if this is right. This is what I'm hearing. So a screen time budget helps determine, I guess, how many hours your family is willing to spend in front of devices, irrespective of what they are, each week. And I guess it's up to each member of the family to determine that and how they actually use those screen hours. Is that right?
Yeah. So you'd have one per person, and so you'd put that in. And this is, I suppose, the most formal and concrete you'd go. So you might want to start off like this and then become a little bit vaguer, or some people just use this as a little bit of scaffolding. So it's up to you how far you want to go. I suppose this is the most formal end of the spectrum to give us a bit of an idea on how to do it. But yeah, basically each person would jot in their hours, what they're striving for this week, and even that's a great place for a conversation. So you'd say, you're only giving yourself an hour on gaming. Do you know how quick that hour is going to, like, it's good to actually think through those numbers when you're planning them. And then at the end of the week, that's when the real conversations, because you see 1 hour blew out to 10. So you have one each, and then you iterate on that.
And how do you know how many hours to allocate per person, per age group then?
I think that's where this whole conversation happens, and that's where that balance is, and that's where you can actually make a decision based on your values as a family. So there are lots of things that come into play there. So with our kids, we look at their personalities, we look at their age, we look at sort of how much homework they're given, and that type of thing. Even, like I said, one of them's sort of really susceptible to, he's got a bit more of an addictive personality, and so we're really careful with that. So at the moment, we've said for him, there's going to be no social media just now. We don't think he's got the maturity for that, so he doesn't have anything in his social media column. It's also sometimes it can be used as a bit of a reward system as well. So if they've actually been mature about this, we'll say, you know what, we might increase your gaming time a couple of hours a week, because you know what, you've shown maturity and you're actually growing in this way. There are other times at the moment at school holidays, so that column goes up as well. That's for our benefit as much as theirs sometimes. So you do have to be flexible, and that's where you sit down as a family and take into account these things that we've learned and say, let's make a common sense decision based on our values, and let's try and stick to that rather than just impulsively letting things go. Because you know what, if we just did that, my kids would especially one of them would easily spend all day, every day on his device in these school holidays.
But like we're saying, you're actually teaching them how to allocate their time and the benefits of it, which is so powerful. So are parents using apps to be able to track this particular screen time budget, or is it a manual process with something on the fridge? What are your recommendations there?
So I just use apps. So there are different apps built into smartphones. So I get a report every day on my use on my computer. So I won't go and name them on here, but there are lots of apps out there. A lot of phones even have it built into their software. You can, I think that's a really good idea, having it as a public one on the fridge, so you can actually mark it down and then they can see how they're going, and it can be sort of interactive. There are lots of other elements. Like this helps you train yourself in so many different aspects of being deliberate in life. So I think that'd be a really good idea as well. I might take that and apply it.
Well, I mean, it's just because in the article you've actually got a chart, and everyone's different. I'm a visual person, so if I was to show you this office, I've got things up on the walls everywhere because that's just how my brain works. But if you have something on the fridge and it is visual for the whole family to see, I don't know if it depends on a case by case scenario, but everyone can be accountable, and it's right there when you go to get the other milk first thing in the morning for your cereal.
That's right. And say, oh, dad, look what's going on here.
So as you mentioned before too, about people and some parents that have completely removed social media from children's lives, do you think that screen time budget and doing this is much more effective than actually slashing screen time or sort of taking things away from kids and leaving them to their own devices, literally, as you sort of mentioned at the start of the chat as well?
Yeah, I do. And I understand that temptation. There are some days where I just want to say, I've had enough. It's all too hard. I'm going to throw it out. Let's sort of go and live in the bush. I understand that temptation. It is so difficult with so much sort of research saying different things out there. But I really do think having a deliberate approach like this is helping them to become sort of responsible citizens in the world that they're growing up in. Often you see families that'll say no technology until 15, and then they're sort of bombarded and they can't handle it. I think you need to drip feed them. We need to train them up, and that's modeling, and that's helping them get a taste for it. And so with my kids at the moment, that is a small taste, and that'll incrementally sort of increase as they get older, as we have conversations. And there are times where we said, you know what, we've given them too much freedom, we need to rein it in. And there are other times where we say, you know what, they're actually showing some maturity, we can increase it. But that's different for every family. But I would really say have that sort of deliberate approach. It's not going away. You're not actually helping them by saying, let's go cold turkey, because at whatever age it is, if you say, look, at 18, they're going to go out, they're going to be absolutely hammered by a world. They're going to be overwhelmed, and they're not going to be a responsible user. And we see that in lots of sort of aspects of life. You're far better off sort of training them up early, especially when they're in that sort of protective environment of the home.
So just to recap them, so parents can set up a successful screen time budget for their family using apps, even if it's just a piece of paper on the fridge. It's all age dependent. Of course, it's up to the parent to allocate whatever amount of time they want per child. But this is something to consistently sort of and diligently sort of bring into your life for the benefit of educating children on the benefits of how they spend their time and being intentional with creating balance also, but being intentional that they're using their screen time from a positive educational perspective, as opposed to it just being a dopamine effect on social media and all
Yeah,
of those things as well.
exactly. And just helping them be aware of all that, helping them be aware of the dangers,
Yeah.
helping them be aware of where our impulsiveness can lead us to sometimes. So I think it's really just equipping them and training them up in a deliberate way.
Yeah.
And there are so many benefits that you see, and one of those is relational. Like it's good fun interacting with the kids and being part of their world. And we are so deliberate in training them up in all these other ways throughout life. Technology is not going anywhere. They need to be responsible users and interactors of technology, because there is a lot of
Absolutely.
danger for them, but they can also do a lot of damage as well. So they need to be aware of these things.
Chris, thank you so much today for providing your insight, from a teacher's perspective, a professional perspective, and also your personal experience, and inviting us into that world. So thank you. And just, for your knowledge and wisdom around education and screen time. If you were to summarize your key messages for anyone watching and listening today, what would they be?
I think that's another tough one. I think the big message is it's really tough. It's a minefield out there. I get to live and breathe this stuff every day, and there are so many times I get it wrong, and so many times I do want to sort of throw my head back and just say, you know what, it's too hard. But my encouragement is just be deliberate about it. You're not going to get it right the first time. In fact, there is no silver bullet. There are so many factors. You know your kid best. But we do need to do this for their sake. We do need to train them up. We do need to model this so that they are that responsible user of tech in the future.
Awesome. Now, we will have a link through to the article in the show notes, and of course, links through to all the 3P learning apps. Otherwise, if parents want to be able to find more information, whereabouts can they sort of find you guys?
So you can find us 3plearning.com. So we have lots of articles on our blog about these types of things. We're thinking about this stuff all the time. World Maths Day is coming up, which is an exciting time just to see sort of kids using tech to come together on a global scale. I think we have 150 countries participate last time, so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, there is a lot of information out there. Some more helpful than others. Yeah, it's tough.
It is. And thank you for acknowledging that and just being open. And once again, it's just being empathetic with families and children's needs. Everyone's, as you said, it's not going away, and it's about how we integrate this into our life, being intentional and creating balance. But thank you so much for your time today, and hope for the opportunity to have another chat with you again in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, stay safe and take care. All right. See ya.
Thanks for having me.
All right, bye.